Okay, so hello everyone. It is really, really good to be with you today. Maybe just to introduce myself, I was a head of department in philosophy of religion in a school outside Belfast, a grammar school. My education was an undergraduate in education and theology, and then for my postgraduate I did a Master of Science in the philosophy of science. So I'm really, really interested in the relationship between science and faith. But I think it might be helpful to comment on, I was listening recently to a talk on the Unbelievable podcast. You may or may not be familiar with that. That's based here in Oxford as a talk show. And I was listening to basically a conversation that involved John Steingard, who was a worship leader over in America, and he was talking about the deconstruction of his faith. And it kind of triggered for me a bit of a thought in my own journey about faith. And basically, to keep a long story short, I grew up in a culture where most people did believe in God. I didn't want to believe in God because Christianity for me was this God's out to kind of get me. He seemed to be quite oppressive and wants to killjoy my life. Whenever I went to university and I started to look at biblical criticism and lots of other ways of looking at knowledge and opinions, and was discovering the new atheist movement and the arguments that they had against God's existence, I was really, really delighted to come across those arguments, because I was like, now finally I have the knowledge that is going to get rid of this God off of my life. So the first thing that I would say is, for me, science was an excuse to finally get rid of the God I did not want. And I would kind of say to you, if you're in the room here today, and perhaps you're not a Christian, and you're coming here to look at science as if there's just going to be this little one piece of knowledge that might either tip you, into God or away from God. Well, the first thing I would say is that the foundations for a walk or relationship with God are relational. So today, if you turn up thinking, I want the scientific knowledge for or against, I'm just going to say to you, it's helpful. We're going to talk about it. But Jesus said metaphorically in John 10, I'm like the shepherd to the sheep. And sheep metaphorically are like Christians who get to know me and know my voice. And relationally, I will lead you in your life. And so I'm just here to sort of set the parameters around this, that when it comes to knowledge or science, it's not like, right, I'm a Christian today, if my knowledge leads me that way, and then if I come across some wonderful theory next week, oh my goodness, it's debunked, I'm now an atheist. Because what is Christianity? Christianity is actually knowing God and Jesus. And so I'm just sort of putting the parameters around this discussion. Now, if I had more time, I would go into the history of science, which we don't have today. But just to say, around the 16th century, when you have Copernicus, his calculations that are obviously questioning their understanding of the solar system at that time, then afterwards we've got Galileo, who uses scientific instruments to prove some of those calculations. It was changing the way knowledge worked, because prior to that, it was just observation. Well, it's commonsensical. And now, all of a sudden, we're now using instruments to change actually what goes against common sense. And so that period of time is the rise of science. In Europe, countries like France, countries like Germany, they were like, how do we give a definition to science? Some were very strict with, it's the natural sciences, so that's chemistry, physics, biology, whereas other people were sort of inputting into that debate, well, it should include the social sciences, anthropology, psychology, because those are also patterns, observations, and theories, so it should include that. When it comes to us here in the UK, when someone says to us, science, we do come to think of it as the natural sciences and what we're gleaning from those subjects. Okay, so the title of today's talk is, Has Science Buried God? And I'm going to present a case to you today to say, no, science has not buried God. God is alive. He's the maker of the universe. And I'm going to suggest to you today, science has not buried God, but some people hold a worldview that they have buried God in their minds. And if that's the case, they come from the worldview of naturalism, materialism, I'll maybe ask you a question. What do you think the difference is between naturalism and materialism? Anybody familiar with these terms? Wants to give it a go? No? Okay, so naturalism means that you think, okay, here's the big questions, here's the knowledge I'm trying to find out. There are only natural answers, no supernatural ones. So let's take the Bible away. Let's take supernatural revelation away. I only want what science can give me. Okay? Materialism basically means that there is nothing that exists in this universe that is not material. It's only physical things. Now, for those of you studying philosophy, obviously we know that there are enigmatic things like consciousness. Do we have a mind, or is it just a brain? So naturalists would say some of those things are enigmatic, and we're not entirely sure, there's a bit more scope for space, but they would still say the answers are natural. Materialists always say, no, everything is just a physical thing. But in terms of our question today, some people say science has buried God because this universe has entirely naturally evolved. The Big Bang, over 14 billion years ago, this Earth around 4.5 billion years old. There's nothing supernatural happening. Science has buried God because now we can understand how we've got here. Now, if you are to put that in its dogmatic statement and you're to write it on the wall like we have it here, science is the only way to truth, it's interesting, isn't it? If you look at the statement, science is the only way to truth. Can science even write the statement? Science is the only way to truth. So for me to put that on the board, I have to use language, English literature, my mind. This debate is, do I have a mind? Is it more than a brain? Do I have consciousness that's outside of just a physical thing? I actually need more than science just to put that statement on the board. And yet, because of someone's prior worldview, they think that science is the only way to truth, and they can't even write the statement on the board. So I'm suggesting to you today that we are thinking science and religion are at war because of someone's worldview, not because of science. Science is a tool to be used, it's wonderful, but it doesn't tell us statements like this. It's something that we use. So people have their prior suppositions, they have their prior commitments. So I am going to clarify that we should be using methodological naturalism. Again, it's another big term. What that means is, when you're trying to find answers, you do it through investigation. And whether you're a theist or an atheist, that's good science, that's good maths. There was one incident where Pierre Laplace, a French mathematician, was apparently talking to Napoleon when he had come up with a new equation, and he was asked, oh, well, where's God in this hypothesis of your mathematics? And Pierre Laplace responded and said, this is a mathematical equation. I have no room or need for God as an hypothesis. And atheists have taken that statement in our culture and they've weaponized that to say, look, maths, science doesn't involve God. Well, this is the interesting thing. For those of you studying the natural sciences, when you're going to class and you're trying to work on pushing what the next equation is or improve our mathematics, you're not going to go to the prayer room for the answer. You're not, looking for divine revelation from that mathematics. I mean, that's wonderful if you get it in that way, but you're going to go to class and you're going to study maths and the rules around it, because that's just the method of how we progress knowledge. Now, this is the difference. The difference between theists who do not believe that God is buried is, why do we have mathematics as a communicable way that makes sense of our universe? Because we have a rational God that's made maths. And we, with our rational minds, can go to class and we can study mathematics with our rational minds. So yes, theists, atheists agree. We do certain methods in investigative ways. The disagreement is the worldview that we operate out of. One says that's the only kind of knowledge. The other says, why do we have that kind of knowledge though? And I'm presenting a case to you today to say, we have the wonderful language of maths and the wonderful language of our brains because we come from a wonderful maker. The mind And that is why we can study subjects like maths, like science. Metaphysical theism is to say the big questions transcend just the natural answers, and we think of God. He makes sense of it cumulatively, whether it's fine-tuning, whether it's consciousness, whether it's whatever mathematical equation you're studying. There are answers out there that transcend it all, and we believe that God is behind it. And these explanations are not in contradiction to each other. Scientists love to use this example, and John Lennox uses this example sometimes, whereby if somebody has a cup of tea in their hand, there are different causes and reasons for that that complement each other. So one reason is scientific, how electricity passes through the coil and how that bubbles up the water to enable the cup of tea to happen. But another complementary reason for having a cup of tea would be because of, I want a cup of tea. I just want a cup of tea. So if I as a person want to have a cup of tea, that is a causal explanation of the cup of tea in the same way as the scientific explanation is there. So why would it be any different for how our universe works? We have theories in science that help us to understand it in one level, and then we have mind, intelligence, purpose, a God that loves us, that is a complementary explanation for our universe as well. Aristotle is still used to help to explain this, and I've just put in the final box here a chair to help you understand this one. So if we take the chair, he said there's causes that happen in multiple levels. Okay? You've got a material cause, so in other words, whether it's plastic or whatever it is that's able to be melted down. You've got the formal cause, which is the shape. I think this is just so cool. At one point in history, someone thought that it would be pretty cool if we sat on a chair. That happened. I think tonight I might go home and Google. It's the first person that ever made a chair. It's interesting though. Before there is anything physical, someone has thought it up in their minds. Before there was a phone, someone had to think, wouldn't it be pretty cool if I talked to someone in my house and they're in their house? It's amazing. Before we have something physical, we have somebody dreaming it up in their mind. What does that sound a little bit like? The universe, which also operates to rules, but coming from mind. So with the chair, you've got the material it's made out of, the shape, the telos. At the end of the day, we have a chair, the cause for it so that we can sit down. But we also have chairs because at one point somebody thought it'd be a really good idea to sit on them. Why do we have a universe? Well, we have the wonderful tool and subject of science to help us understand that on one level. But the efficient cause, the final box, according to Aristotle, is the source. Why are we able to have life? Why are we able to have minds? Why are we able to have this conscious living of life? Because we have a source. And the source is the creator of the universe. And so, when I come back to my own story, when I became a teacher, I sort of went on a journey of faith over time. For me, the logic and the science was quite important because that's what had debunked or deconstructed my faith in earlier years. So that was important for me to go on a journey. But it was the cumulative case. Now, to give you one example of something that was quite persuasive to me, was Alvin Plantinga. He is an American philosopher. And he says that, why is it that we have cognitive faculties that transcend physical reactions, and yet we trust those mental judgments? So, go with me here in understanding this one. Remember we said that the atheist worldviews are naturalism, materialism. If you believe that we have only come from physical, natural things, no mind and consciousness that's not just a physical thing, then why should we ever know? Why should we be able to rise above that, to question it? We should just be in the process. And yet Plantinga says, you have a mind that rises above nature because you are mind. So So the Christian presentation to you, the case that science is not very God, is because you are not just a random chance. You're not just a physical thing. God has made you body, soul, and mind. Why is it that we want to be known and loved? Why is it that we want to be able to live in art and beauty and transcend just physical things? Because we're not just physical things. It's amazing. If we're only a material being, then how could we evolve to having the ability to transcend matter? We should just be automatic beings stuck in the process. So for me, I find that really convincing. It was like a cumulative case where I thought, I don't know if you've ever sat in a fine-tuning lecture. Whenever I studied fine-tuning in my Master's of Science, I was just like, okay. Whenever you see the mathematics that's absolutely off the scale for the short and the long-term, physical constants that are needed for life on Earth, and you're just like, what is the counter-argument for how life could have evolved? And then you realise that modal logic, which just explores possibilities and could-bes, we could be part of a multiverse and life could be in other universes. We could be, yes. What do we know? We know that if the conditions for life were any different, we would not be here. And for me, that was again a part of a cumulative case into thinking, this looks like a put-up job, probably because it was a design. It just was all starting to add up. But actually, has science buried God? No. Because the science and science were actually starting to point me towards the fact there was a creator. So you might be thinking, well, so this is okay, but I'm aware of theories that could be counter theories to the idea of God designing this universe, like the Big Bang theory. The Big Bang initially was actually rejected by atheists, not theists. It wasn't theism that was intimidated in any way by that science. So in the 1920s to the 60s, basically heat and light expanding, they eventually came to call that the Big Bang. It was challenging a philosophical thought that actually had justified atheism, and it was this. People like David Hume were postulating it. The universe has always been here. Why do we need a first cause? Because it is what it is. And then the science was starting to prove the fact that the universe was not always here. And the atheists were like, oh dear, this is not good. And yet it frustrates me, I will just say this now as a teacher today, it really frustrates me that in the school system in particular, that this is being taught as if this is a rival theory to God. How can it be a rival theory to God? I'm just obviously building a case for you, I'm not like, chastising you, I'm just saying this is the conversation in my mind. What does it actually just say? The Big Bang literally just says, the universe was not always here, and then it was. What does Genesis 1 verse 1 say? In the beginning. What does the Big Bang say? In the beginning. Now it's interesting that our physicists then try to push the debate back, and they're like, oh, hold on. So people like Lawrence Krauss, Lee Smolin, they basically say, well, prior to the Big Bang, there was like a quantum energy, it was no thing, doesn't mean there was nothing, it inevitably bubbled up and the universe came back. The question doesn't change. Whether it's an energy, however far back you go, the idea is that before you have matter, you have mind. And this is what the Christian story is telling us, is that we are both matter and mind, just exactly as our universe has come to be. And then you might say, well, that's all right, Sarah, but no offense, evolution slightly contradicts all the things that you believe. Well, does it? The majority of Christians involved in science have absolutely no problem resolving their faith to scientific theories. Now, this conversation could go in a billion ways, and I think in the Q&A it might be good to allow a bit of space for that to go in whatever direction that you want that to go in. I'm just going to make a couple of comments on this. A couple of comments are that I want you to understand Genesis in the context of ancient Near East true myth. No, I'm not saying it is that type of literature, but I just want you to understand how ancient Near East people think, which is different to us. We are post the rise of science, so we ask questions like, how many days did it take? How old is the Earth? You know, how could all the animals have fitted on the ark? We ask very literal scientific questions. Why? Because we live in a country that highly values that method. That is not the questions of the ancient Near East who are writing stories like Genesis. Because their world is very different. Their world is my God true? Is your God true? How many gods are there? Because the other ancient Near East stories, like the Gilgamesh epic or the Enuma Elish, these stories are saying there's lots of gods and it's chaotic and they're disinterested in us and we kind of are a byproduct of their warring. What does Genesis say? Genesis says we have a God who loves us, who made us. We're intentional. And he actually is powerful over the creation, not warring with other gods. So the questions that Genesis was concerned with, they're not actually our questions. Now that's not to say that we don't investigate our questions, but we have to first of all put ourselves into the context of that. So just one final comment before I maybe bring my friend Zoe up with me. Genesis 1 to 11 are the hugely debated chapters. Some scientists who are theists will accept absolutely every part of the scientific modern picture. Evolution is true. I should maybe clarify that macroevolution is whenever basically there is genetic mutations to the cell that allows the development of species from simple to complex. And they would agree that that is the truth of how the diversity of life through mechanisms like natural selection has been able to come about. People like Alistair McGrath that I've taught at this university would be very much acceptors of that picture. So how do they reconcile with the creation story? Well, they reconcile it in ways that I've just said. They see Genesis as a literature that is written in a style of a culture that is not our culture, but it's still true. We don't get that because we're so scientific. They get that because what is God revealing through the story? That he is actually literally true. He is the maker of the heavens and the earth. He is the one that cares for us, and it tells us the truth. So it's not like Alistair McGrath, for example, is coming along to say, well, I'll just skip over bit 1 of Genesis and we'll begin at Exodus and then I'll continue my Christian faith. He believes Genesis because it's telling us the truth. And this is the final comment on this. Whether you accept macroevolution as a Christian or other ways of reconciling science, this is the point. We are not random. The creation, the universe, was not just a random chance. It was designed by the mind and the maker that wanted us to be. And so I would just encourage you today, if you're not a Christian, I personally think that science is pointing us towards God. I don't want to overstate the case with my own life, but I'm just going to say science was an excuse. It was an excuse for me to run from a God that I did not want to be there, and I did not have a good impression of. And when I went on my journey, science was important in actually it's just a cumulative case. It was pointing me to God, but I had to go on a journey where relationally, I had to understand who the true God is, that he turned out to be very different than what my presuppositions of him were. And so I would encourage you to explore the true Jesus Christ, who is not the oppressor that he's made out to be. John chapter 8, I have come to set you free. That's what true God does. Bad religion oppresses. That was my experience. When I met the real Jesus Christ, he set me free, and science helps actually to support my faith. Okay, so come forward.